season begins. What is it, tomorrow or oh no, August 1st is when it begins for me. Just because
okay.
that's when it starts cooling off a little bit and the atmosphere gets a little spookier, and I just need that much time in order to get through my entire list, and I probably won't.
Yeah, I know. There's been so many good horror movies that have come out so far this year that I've said, oh, I want to see that, and it's still on my list. So I think I'm actually going to have, probably a lot of 2024 movies on that list that I just haven't watched yet before I even get into like kind of creating a list of that's going to be more like some new stuff and a lot of classics and whatever. But I just feel like, is that in keeping? I mean, it seems like there's been more horror every year, more horror releases. I don't know whether that's got anything to do with coming out of the strike or the pandemic. Those easier to make as opposed to the big budget films that seem to have definitely gotten, slowed down by the strike.
Yeah, no, I think you can get a huge return on them for very little money. They're pretty much a kind of a easy sell, especially if it's a Blumhouse or something more accessible for all audiences kind of thing. And yeah, they're quick to make. You can crank them out pretty easily, and then fairly popular. Although I have heard that they are slowing, like their performance is slowing down a little bit. I almost wonder if there's too many coming out. But I think they're always going to be.
Yeah, because every few months there's a ton of horror coming out if you just look. If you go on YouTube or if you just scan on like Amazon Prime for stuff to watch, I'm like, God, there's so many horror movies, and a lot of them are probably sort of direct to video quality, but even the ones that are good that get a little play, it's like, man, there's so many, and I keep earmark a few to watch, and I never seem to get around to it, but I will effort that. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. We are back. Welcome back, and thank you for coming back. As usual, we've had another long delay, and we won't even get into it. I've been busy with my new job and getting acclimated. Cam, you've had a lot of challenges with your work. But we're here now, and we're focused, and we're ready to talk about The Acolyte, which has garnered a lot of discussion.
Definitely a lot of attention.
As we do, we always say thank you for listening, and please do on our various platforms, wherever you listen to your podcasts, or on Twitter/X or Facebook, or we now actually also have a YouTube channel for Worlds Beyond because Google no longer supports podcasts, so they give us the option to send our feed to a YouTube channel, so things may develop out of that over time. But again, thank you, and please do like, comment, etc. Anywhere that you're able to do that, we appreciate that.
Yes, yeah, we're gonna try to start ramping up our social media a little bit better, and maybe do a little bit of a, maybe not a revamp or reboot, but kind of a refresh of the podcast format, and try to get things out a little bit more regularly, although we'll see how that goes. But, yep, now we have a little bit of a backlog, so we can crank 2 episodes out, so hopefully you'll stick with us through The Acolyte and Deadpool, which will be coming up shortly after this. But, yeah, Acolyte, do you want to start?
No, I was going to ask you. I think there's been a lot of, typical Star Wars fandom controversy and typical, stuff floating around this one. So, yeah, what are your overall thoughts?
Right, I don't want to get too much into that, but I think it's definitely worth a quick discussion just because I do think this is being very unfairly treated. Because me personally, I do have a couple pretty big problems with it, but just in terms of what I have been looking for Star Wars since Disney bought it, however many years ago, over 10 years ago now, this is what I've been waiting for the entire time. I just think that Disney has this kind of obsession with the weird, like, lived-in desert universe of the original movies, and we've seen so many desert planets and so many, like, backwater cantinas and all that sort of thing, and it's like, that, to me, that might be more closer to what original Star Wars people like, but I grew up with the prequels, and so I've been waiting for lightsaber battles that involve more than 1 or 2 characters, cool Sith, and awesome lightsaber fights and that sort of thing. We started to get that a little bit with Ahsoka, but to me, this really exemplifies everything I've always wanted a Star Wars thing to be exploring the Jedi and the Jedi at the height of their power. And I just think this really hit that. So I might be a little bit biased, I guess, towards this kind of material, but I also think that it was just overall very well made. The cinematography and production was all outstanding. I thought they did a really good job creating new characters and actually making us care about them instead of just like with something like Ahsoka or Obi-Wan. I kind of felt like they were just like, well, we have these characters and everyone loves them, so it doesn't matter what they do. If they just swing a lightsaber around for a little bit, everyone will love it. Here, I feel like they had more of a challenge where they had to create a totally new cast of characters, and I honestly thought they did a really good job getting you to care about them and characterizing them, that sort of thing. And I think just overall, the plot of this kind of like lost sibling, and one has kind of gone to the dark side, one's gone to the light side, not to get too much into spoilers, but that's set up fairly early. Mm-hmm. That's one of my favorite kind of fiction tropes where there's these siblings that have separated and they've gone different paths and reconnected, and they have to kind of navigate all that. That being said, I do have a couple nitpicks with the kind of impetus for the entire plot. I thought it was a little bit contrived and a little bit unbelievable how it all kind of got started, but we can get into that a little bit later. But overall, I absolutely loved it. Might be my favorite Star Wars thing since Rogue One. Although it's mainly more, not necessarily, I think it was very well made, but it was mainly just more that we're finally getting this side, the Jedi, Mystic, Force side of Star Wars, a lot stronger than we have in any of the other Disney properties, maybe aside from the animated stuff. But that's my little ramble about that. I'll certainly have more to say, but I'll let you share your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. I think you definitely liked it a lot more than I did. I will say, just at a base, I enjoyed it. Just as for all of the Star Wars fandom controversy surrounding this, just a lot of noise about, oh, well, it's social politics, is blah, blah, blah. My take and test on that is I'm definitely somebody who's like, when I sit down to watch entertainment, especially genre entertainment, I want to be first and foremost entertained and told a story. If some kind of message or position or something like that seems to be trumping the story, and it's more about somebody wanting to, preach about something or get some message across, and it trumps the story, I don't like that. But I will say, I heard a lot of noise about that. When I sit down and watch this show, I don't get that from this. I don't get that there was any.
Oh, not at all. I don't get it.
I didn't feel like there was any really, people were going out of their way to make any kind of social political message over and above a story. So as for that, I didn't get it. Overall, yes, we're in a different setting and environment. I really liked the first episode. I thought, hey, we're going somewhere in this. As it moved on, like you're alluding to, and I'll let you start the discussion more on that. As far as this whole, when this takes place versus more sort of modern or recent Star Wars, we can talk about that. To me, I didn't, they made this whole big thing about how, what is the era during which it takes place? I forget the name of it.
The High Republic.
I was like, okay, it just seemed like Star Wars, to me, maybe a little bit earlier than, the sort of common era or whatever it's called that we're used to. But like, I didn't really could have told me it took place anytime and I would have been like, okay, it's just Star Wars universe, which never, which one of the things about the Star Wars universe is that it has that lived in quality with the ships. And, we've just always had light speed travel. We've always had intergalactic and interplanetary travel. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, and almost seems like, from an evolutionary and technology standpoint, that apparently thousands of years have gone by, and it's sort of like the same sort of like level of technology and advancement, so it's almost kind of like a weird stagnation to the Star Wars universe in some way, that it just sort of stays the same. That's probably too much of an aside, but overall, I enjoyed this show. I do feel like in a lot of spots, it does suffer to me from a lot of things that some of the weaker Star Wars television shows suffer from, in just terms of like overly simplistic plot, a lot of very, to me, obvious contrivances to get from point A to point B, some things that just had me scratching my head. It's like, why did someone do that? Or just having me saying like, well, it seems like you only did that so that we could do this to get to here, to get to there. So right. I found there was a lot of that got in that was distracting for me over the course of watching the show, but I watched all 8 episodes and I enjoyed it, and I think it had a lot of very interesting points and a few really cool moments. But overall, I would say this is definitely somewhere in the, looking at the TV shows, the Disney TV shows, it's, it doesn't hold a candle to Andor. I'd say it's somewhere in that, kind of middle range.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I honestly thought, I mean, not that the plot was anything like groundbreaking or anything, but I felt that it was at least a few steps above something like Mandalorian, or I mean, certainly light years ahead of Obi-Wan.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, it's definitely not, doesn't come off as just sort of paint by numbers as Obi-Wan did, but to me, there were parts of it that definitely felt like that to me, where I was like, come on,
yeah, towards the back half, I started feeling like that a little bit more. I just think the overall setup and characters were just a lot stronger. I just felt like I was watching this because I actually cared about how the story was going to progress, whereas like Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, I was watching it just because it's Star Wars and I had to watch it. Whereas this actually drew me in and I felt like I wanted to continue watching it. And part of that I think might be just because I went in with such low expectations. I was really not expecting very much from this at all, but just the kind of concept of person going around and killing Jedi and kind of a murder mystery almost set up, I thought was very intriguing. And I really liked the main character, Osha. She's been in a few
great
things. I didn't realize, or I guess I did realize, but she was Rue in Hunger Games, which is like mind blowing to me.
Yeah, that's so funny.
And then
it seems like, wow, was that long
right?
ago? But apparently,
and it's funny too. This is totally unrelated, but the guy that killed her was Jack Quaid, who's been in a whole bunch of stuff recently. Obviously, he was the killer in Scream, in the first reboot.
Oh,
but anyway, I thought the cast overall was very good. It was interesting that they killed. I guess we'll get into spoilers. It might sound like we're spoiling a lot of stuff, although a lot of this really does happen kind of early on. Although I was very surprised that they got Carrie-Anne Moss more or less just to kill her in like the first 5 minutes. She does end up coming back, but I thought the cast was one of the big standouts for me. I thought everyone did a very good job. In particular, obviously, Amanda Stenberg as Osha and her twin May. I thought she did a really good job of separating those two characters enough that you could tell who was who, while still keeping that familial background. And I really liked. I can't remember the actor's name off the top of my head, but the Sith Lord. I guess his name was Khmer or something like that. I thought he was easily one of my favorite new Star Wars characters, just in terms of his attitude. And obviously I'm a huge sucker for really cool Sith action. And I thought his kind of just overall view and a little bit more nuanced of a take on a Sith character, I thought. I'm kind of going off in a bazillion different directions. I have a lot of thoughts, but I'll pass it over to you. Maybe we can focus the conversation a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, overall in the cast was solid. Amanda Stenberg, she was very good. Lee Jung-jae as Soul, he was good overall. I liked his character. And then there was that Charlie Barnett as Yor Dafandar, one of the Jedis. I know if we are getting into spoilers, one of the Jedis that surprisingly gets killed off about halfway or less than halfway off through the series. And I think, and again, to me, I was like, okay, they got killed off. I mean, on the one hand, you say like, well, it seems like all of the principal and likable, sort of relatable characters always survive in all of these types of shows. So, they were doing something different by killing them off, but it felt a little like, I don't know. I felt like it was a little bit of just like shock value killing Jord Vandar off, and as well as Jecki, who was played by Daphne Keane, who we'll be talking about in Deadpool, and obviously who was, came to light in Logan. She's awesome in His Dark Materials.
Oh, I forgot she was in that.
HBO, which I watched her in. And I was like, who is that? I recognize that voice. But obviously she's, she plays a very alien character. And I was like, oh, it's her.
Right. Once I learned that it was her, I could tell it was her. But before that, I was like, she looks really familiar, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Yeah.
I was just saying the two of them were very good. And, I did feel like Jord Vandar's character, he kind of comes into his own right in that sort of pivotal third episode, I believe it is, when they encounter this Sith character. And kind of like gets his act together before he kind of comes off as a little bit of like a foil and like the just sort of the dumb, almost like the Jedi version of a dumb jock.
Right.
In the early episodes. Yeah, but the cast overall, I guess it's Manny Jacinto or Jacinto. It plays that Khmer character that, he was very good. And Carrie-Anne Moss was good. She was fine. To me, overall, the cast, I will say, I don't think anyone's performance like blew me away in this show. And to maybe get into a little bit of the whole Osha May character, and this is not a commentary on the acting so much as the writing, I do feel like, especially in an 8-episode show, there was so much flip-flopping among the two of those in terms of 1 minute, Osha is the more sort of sympathetic, thoughtful character who's not, doesn't let her emotions get the best of her, and then she's determined to find her sister, and then all of a sudden then she decides to, not stun her and let her get away. And then the two of them flip several times through the course of the show in terms of just completely putting their motivations on their heads. Of all of a sudden, May is this vengeance-ridden, singularly focused, going down this path, and then all of a sudden she kind of has second thoughts and wants to help the cause or bring Khmer to justice or whatever the case may be. And then likewise with Osha, she goes from just seemingly, not that people obviously can't, have a turnabout, but it just seems like there was a lot of flip-flopping in the writing with her character that, again, to suit where they wanted to take the plot, I felt.
Yeah, there was one point that I definitely agree with that, and it was when, I think probably the 4th episode was when Khmer and May were looking for the Wookiee Jedi there. I can't remember his name. And she ends up kind of tricking him and getting him trapped and then saying like, oh, I'm going to betray you. That to me came kind of out of nowhere because she seemed very determined to reach the Jedi there at first, and then just kind of out of nowhere, it seemed like she flipped on a dime. That to me stood out as a little bit strange. Although I for the rest of it, I thought it was fairly well done, just in terms of, I think it was kind of purposeful because you do have this conflict with Osha where she has believed that the Jedi were telling her the truth the whole time. And I think, going back and forth between that was almost intentional because it was kind of her story about how she fell to the dark side and kind of moving towards that. I kind of felt like they were almost trying to do a better fall to the dark side story than Anakin's in the prequels, because I just felt like her, as much as some of what led to her downfall was a little bit contrived, it felt a little bit more natural where like by the end of it, after everything, and she learned the truth about what the Jedi did and everything, I very much felt like, it makes a lot of sense that she would turn to the dark side as kind of a last resort kind of thing, very much in the same way Anakin did, although I thought, obviously, the prequels didn't do a very good job of portraying that. But yeah, that didn't stand out to me particularly, aside from that one scene, and I think overall it worked otherwise, so it didn't bother me too much. And then kind of going back, I think, to the deaths, I think the deaths were shock value, but we've seen so many lightsaber stabs in the past few series that have resulted in basically nothing. It happened multiple times in Ahsoka, happened multiple times in Obi-Wan, and so to finally have lightsabers be deadly again felt very good. And I was genuinely upset when both of them died. When Yord died, or I can't remember who died first. I guess it was Jecki. And I was like, that sucked because I really liked her character. And then, but once that was done, I figured it was over. And then to kill Yord too, that pissed me off. So I definitely had a genuine emotional reaction to both of their deaths, which I have to give them credit for. And I do think it was necessary just to kind of up the stakes and show that we're gonna actually have lightsabers do a little bit of damage again. But kind of along those same lines, that whole 5th episode really sold me on the whole series because it was basically just one long lightsaber fight. They didn't do really any lightsaber fights for the first few episodes, and then gave us, in my opinion, one of the coolest that I've ever seen. And that's another positive for me, was the action and lightsaber choreography and fight scenes I thought were all incredibly well done. Really cool moves, especially on the part of the Sith character there. The Master, I guess, is his Sith name. And then that 5th episode, and then the duel in the last episode, I was very impressed with. And that definitely led to me liking the series more, just finally being able to hear multiple lightsabers going off at the same time and seeing all the different flashy moves and everything. We finally got a little bit more prequel-style lightsaber duels where it was just insane lightsaber twirling and that sort of thing. And I've been waiting for that. I think they've been... I think previously they were just so afraid to do anything prequel related that wasn't animated because of how people felt about the prequels, but I really think this was a step in the right direction. And I'm just bummed that it's caught up in this whole culture nonsense, because I really just did not think there was really any overt political message one way or the other with this show. So, and if it ends up getting canceled or not renewed for a second season because of that, I would be really bummed, because the production in that 5th episode, when they introduce the Sith Lord for the first time and he kind of floats down in the background out of focus, and just all of the cinematography for that scene. There's these 2 really quick shots when he's chasing May through the forest, and it's like a close-up shot of him tracking him as he like floats through the forest. It just looked really cool. And that just kind of leads me to my ultimate point about this, was I just felt like everyone was on their A game. Obviously, the writing was a little bit iffy in spots, but in terms of just the production, the acting, the special effects, it just felt like there was a lot of care put into every angle of it. And I'm bummed that it's not being appreciated, because I think, especially compared to Obi-Wan and even compared to Ahsoka, there was just a lot more professional quality here than some of the previous stuff.
I would say, when I talked about in my opening that there was some really cool moments, that was probably for me the coolest moment in the show, was the Khmer, the Sith, before you knew who he was. What that Sith character, seemingly to be this almost like supernatural force, just arriving and floating down on the planet and wiping a bunch of them out and chasing them through. That definitely had almost that scary movie quality to it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought there was a couple of the sort of wire work scenes that felt a little Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, quite as good, with people like floating around or jumping down doing sort of martial arts moves that seemed a little didn't quite pull it off to me, but I'm no expert at that stuff. But overall, I would agree with you. Performances were all great. Probably, if I had to pick, Daphne Keene's character was probably my favorite. To me, I would really like to see them step up the writing and do a better job working out what they're really trying to get to and accomplish. So I'll say, what did you think of the brief look we get at whatever that sort of puppet master behind Khmer that pokes his head out for 2 seconds seems to be the puppet master? I don't know. Is that people? I didn't really pay too much attention, but I mean, it seemed to me that people online were sort of implying that he could be some known evil Sith, Darth something or other.
Yeah, ostensibly it's Darth Plagueis, who was Palpatine's master. He talks about him in episode 3, Darth Plagueis the Wise. It's kind of a meme at this point, but so I think that was hinting towards that. Although it's kind of interesting if you think about it. I think this was supposed to be. I thought initially it was supposed to be significantly before the prequels, although I think it's actually only about 100 years. But it's weird because obviously Khmer would be Plagueis's apprentice at this point, but obviously that can't last if he eventually finds Palpatine. So I would be interested in seeing, and he looks a little bit different than I would have expected Darth Plagueis to look, at least based on illustrations from the previous universe, which Disney kind of canned after they bought it. So I think they've confirmed it is him, but I would be interested in seeing how that all works out.
And what do you think about how they're portraying the Jedi? Just as the Jedi seem a lot more, by the time we get to the prequels, the Jedi seem a lot more sort of kind of noble and all on track and all on the same page. Here they seem, and maybe that, and I guess I presume that is intentional, that they're a little more morally gray and capable of doing selfish things and et cetera here.
Well, that's one of the big flaws of the prequels is that it doesn't portray the Jedi like that. When in fact, if you listen to George and all the supplemental material around that, like the prequels are supposed to be the Jedi at their absolute lowest point. Like they can't even figure out Palpatine is a Sith Lord, but they know that the Sith exist, and one of their biggest mistakes was getting the clone army. They should never have. The whole point of the prequels is that them going to war was a total corruption of the Jedi. So really, if you take what it's supposed to be, this was kind of the beginning of the end for the Jedi, where they start to see a lot of the cracks in their kind of faith or belief system. And the prequels are supposed to be kind of the very end, and the ultimate kind of failure of the Jedi and their hubris to assume that they had, control over the situation. But obviously that was not portrayed particularly well in the prequels, and that's more on George than anybody else. But ostensibly, George says that it's supposed to be a big kind of, the prequels are supposed to be portraying the Jedi at their absolute lowest point.
Well, then the one other thing I was going to say, and it probably kind of lines up. So the final scene, obviously, is Vanestra going to see a Jedi Master. Mm-hmm. And, the implication is that it's Yoda. And obviously he's supposed to be like 800 years old or whatever, so it very much could be him. But I just got that same set, you brought up how do they not know Palpatine. It seems like Yoda was always suspicious of Palpatine, but when she opens the doors and I see Yoda, I'm like, there's all this nonsense going on and Jedi murders and, all this back and forth and like a bunch of Jedis getting wiped out and, and everything. And like, so Yoda's on the scene and he doesn't have any clue.
Yeah, Yoda's lack of involvement, I think, was a big thing. I was surprised I brought him in at all, because you'd kind of think if he would be kind of front and center there, and if they couldn't get him or they didn't want to do him for whatever reason, they could have just forgotten him. But including him at the end that was a little strange, and
calls into question a couple of, a bunch of other stuff. I just obviously they were going for the cool reveal and that he'll figure into the plot of season 2. And I believe it has been renewed for season 2, but at the same time it just made me immediately go like, huh? So again, like that just takes me back to the writing. I'm like, maybe they'll do take a little more time kind of like developing the storyline so that the individual beats seem to make a little bit more sense. But yeah, so overall, I enjoyed it. I didn't think, like I said, this is sort of mid Disney TV Star Wars live action for me. That's sort of my overall conclusion, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I guess kind of wrapping up, the big negative that I had, and we've alluded to it the entire episode, I don't think we've discussed it yet, was that 7th episode where they kind of reveal the impetus for the entire situation I thought was very messy. It just felt like why are you like that one Jedi that kind of just fucked everything up just because he wanted to go home. I thought that was really stupid. And it just all the choices both. And I think that was probably one of the big challenges they had was they had to create a situation where neither side was really in the wrong. And it was just a big misunderstanding. But I think it ended up being more of a comedy of errors more than anything else. So it's just like, if you just took 1 second to stop and explain to each other what's going on, none of this would have happened. And that was, I think, the big failing for me was it was just very contrived as to how the whole misunderstanding happened, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And it's just like, you probably could have done it a little bit in a simpler way, or maybe not even
gone back to it,
portray it at all. Kind of leave it up to the imagination. And I think that leads me to my biggest thing was I think this could have very easily have been a 2-hour, even under 2-hour movie. I don't think there was really anything in this that necessitated it being an 8-episode TV show. The plot really did not need to be any more than 2 hours. And it's not like we've said, it's not a particularly groundbreaking or novel plot. And we've seen this kind of same story play out in films before. So I think that might have been another one of the issues. They're just trying to string this very simple plot throughout 8 30-minute episodes. Although, then they are shorter than maybe a normal TV drama episode might be. But I think they really got to get back into the movie, Star Wars movie business. I don't know how much depth Star Wars has for these kind of prestige TV shows.
Yeah, no, but you nailed it. That episode and that whole, usually, when obviously TV shows and movies have done this, okay, now we're going to go back to this moment and sort of show you a different perspective thing. And usually there are some like surprising and like, eye-opening reveals, and like, this almost served to kind of like almost muddy the waters more than clear anything up, because we come out of it, we still don't really know what the hell I thought we were going to find out what the hell May and Osha really are. They're not two people, they're one person. They were, they were created somehow. That's still like kind of like up in the air. The two biggest things were when Indara is fighting off the influence of all those, of all the witch ladies who are controlling Kelnaka, I think is the Wookiee's name. And then she kind of like flushes them out of his head, and they all kind of drop, I thought, unconscious, but it turns out she killed all of them just with that, kind of like, get out of my mind sort of X-Men thing. Like, so I thought like she thrust them out of his head so he could come back to himself, but they all dropped, and I'm like, I just was like convinced they were just unconscious, and I'm like, she killed them all? Like that seemed like, really? And then the other thing, when Sol draws his lightsaber, when the mother Anastasia goes into her witch mode or whatever, and like there was nothing overtly threatening about what she was doing. She just sort of was like invoking her mojo, and he draws his lightsaber and kind of holds it up beside him, and then just for some reason he just like moves it over to where she was all, witching out and, going into her like in and out of phase thing. And then she was out of phase. Why didn't she just say a wispy thing and fly over to the other side of the room? Like it just didn't make any sense. And so it was like, it just obviously seemed to me he wasn't like overtly, it didn't seem to me he was overtly stabbing her. That whole thing just was like, what?
Yeah, that was the biggest failing in my opinion of the show, but I don't think it didn't ruin it enough for me. I thought the rest of the show was good enough that I still really enjoyed it, but I thought they could have done a little bit better.
And likewise, like I said, end to end overall, I enjoyed it. But I just felt like there was a lot more that could. There's just, they just, I don't know. I'll just say it could have been. The story work could have been a lot better.
That is the probably a wrap on Acolyte. Yes. Do we know what the next Star Wars thing is even going to be? I don't really think we do.
I don't know. I know there's a lot. Isn't there something with Rey in development?
They've been floating that. I don't know how far that's going to get based on all the other movie projects in development, but I guess we'll see.
Andor season 2,
I'm not particularly interested. Oh, that's in production
so
now.
That I'm super psyched for. To me, that's been one of the best Star Wars things.
I think that's probably is the best Disney Star Wars thing that they've produced so far, maybe next to Rogue One.
So excited about that. I guess we'll just wrap it here. Say again, thanks for listening. Please do like, comment, etc. On our various, wherever you're finding us. And shout out to Lockwood & Co., my favorite show. And actually, I think it was CBR just did a retrospective of best adaptions of children's books, and even going back to like Little House on the Prairie, like the top 10 ever, and they had Lockwood & Co. as number 1. So if you haven't read those books by Jonathan Stroud or watched that show on Netflix, which we're still hoping somehow gets another season and gets to adapt more of those awesome books. They did just do another meetup of the fandom, and Jonathan Stroud showed up, and Joe Cornish showed up as well. So I mean, like that's a lot of commitment for a producer and the head of Complete Fiction to show so much devotion to that story. So great show, great books. Watch them, read them, and we will be back shortly with Deadpool.
See you on the next one, guys.